Hey everyone, happy Figma Friday. Welcome to today's live stream. My name is Josh. I am a community manager here at Figma, focused mostly on online, so working on Twitter, Spectrum, and a bunch of other things. And I'm joined today with Tom.
Hey all, I'm Tom, and I'm a designer advocate at Figma. We're both remote, so I'm located in the cold, rainy area just outside of Toronto, Canada.
And I'm sorry, I forgot about this. I'm in Long Beach, so just south of LA, and it's pretty nice here. It's like 60 something degrees, 67, I think. So
Nice.
Fahrenheit. Sorry for everyone on Celsius like you. Oh, I've got to learn that one day. But yeah, anyways, thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully you can hear us just fine. So today, kind of after we just launched kind of some updates to our line height, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. We're going to talk about typography in Figma. This might be a bit of a shorter stream, but and maybe a lot of it's repeat, especially if you're kind of a pro Figma user or you're using Figma every day. But we thought it'd be good to just kind of go over all the different options and some shortcuts. So to get us started, we'll just go over the very basics here. But so type in Figma. We have our text tool, which can be found in the top toolbar here. You can also activate it with T. So hitting T will activate it. We've got click once for a single line of text. So if I click, you'll now see that I have text here. There you go. You can click and drag to create a text area. So all of this should feel very similar if you're coming from Sketch or any other design tool. You have another text box here, so you can do that. And then as far as editing text, let me just create another text box. So you can double click to kind of enter the edit mode. So double click for that, or if you have the layer selected, oftentimes I'll go through my layer panel, I find this text, and then I can just hit enter, and then it will enter that edit mode as well. So super basic, but I think knowing that shortcut will make it a lot quicker. So if you're still going up to the toolbar, definitely use T to start creating your text boxes. So from there, just going over a lot of the basics here. So obviously within Figma, we support multiple fonts. Because we're a web-based tool, using custom fonts is a little different. So if you're using Figma within the browser, you'll need to download our font helper, which can be found if you go into, where is that? Help an account. No. I think actually if you go back in here and
You you
count
can also go to
settings.
figma.com/downloads as well.
Okay, perfect. Forgot where we put this. I know it's on one of these pages. Anyways, we have a font helper. We'll put the link in the description here after. So you'll need that to use your own fonts if you're using the browser. If you're using the desktop app on Mac or Windows, no need to download that. It should support your custom fonts. So from there, changing a font should be super simple. We have the text properties panel over here. And we have the drop down, so you can search through your fonts, selecting different ones here. That is not a good font. Anyway, so you create those fonts there. You have your weight, so you can go through here. This is kind of a different one. So we separate them out through kind of the regular styles through the different weights, starting at the smallest to the heaviest. And then we have the italic versions. If the font supports it, you'll see that there. So you can, go through all of these, selecting the different weights, font size. We have some defaults here. You can also type in your own number. So if I wanted this to be exactly 22, you'll get that. You'll also be able to kind of drag through here. So if you hold down the Option key, you'll see these little arrows pop up, and then you can actually slide this across. This also works, although it what am I trying to say? It also affects the kind of the text frame. But if you use our scale tool, which is just K, this will also adjust that font size. So you can see it's going now in kind of these increments. So be careful with this. You will get kind of these half pixels, but that's another way to resize. Let me just drop that back down. We're going to go over line height and everything. It should be set to auto by default. Letter spacing, same kind of thing. All of this should be pretty simple. We've got paragraph spacing. So let me create a new frame here. And just make that a little smaller. So when you're using enter to create a new paragraph here, if I select this, you'll notice that anytime I press enter, it's going to adjust that spacing there. If I do a soft return, so after this line here, soft return, it will not affect it. So you see these two are grouped together. I can kind of show that a little easier. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so we'll do one return there, and then this I'll do shift and then enter for a soft return. And then if I adjust my paragraph spacing, you'll see it's only adjusting the spacing between rubato and then that gibberish below it. So that's paragraph spacing, and then you also have paragraph indentation. So this is all super useful if you're laying out a lot of text. Our last stream around, or no, it was 2 streams ago around using layout grids and everything. That's super helpful when you're kind of laying out blocks of text. And then lastly, you kind of have your alignment options, so centered, right align, left align, and then your alignment within this text box. So right now I have this kind of large one. It's 712 pixels high. I can center them in the middle, so that puts even pixels on either side of it. The bottom or the default should be aligned top. So those are the basic settings. We do have shortcuts too for this. We'll get into some of these other little tips and tricks, but if you pull up the keyboard shortcuts panel and then go to text, you'll find all the shortcuts that are related to the text option. So those ones for align left, center, and right. You can also use Option, Command, L, T, and R. And this should show the correct shortcuts. If you're on Windows, it will be a little bit different. Adjust font size. You have Shift, Command, left angle bracket, or whatever you call that, right. And you have letter spacing and line height. So those are the basics. Let me close that here. So one of the things we wanted to show, though, especially as you're using custom fonts, so I have this one, Sporting Grotesque, which is a great font, but Tom does not have it. So I'm actually going to switch to his screen and show kind of how we handle that when you're working with custom fonts.
Yeah, so right now I can see this text box that Josh has created with Sporting Grotesque. And if you'll see it that I click into it, right away it tells me as an editor that I'm missing this font. Now, if we were going to use a different font, I could map this to another font that I have. In this case, I could obviously have to get the font to continue editing within Figma. But one of the nice things is that the outlines, the look of the font is preserved. And where that also comes in handy is if you're sharing the link with developers and they're coming in to inspect your file. So in this case, I'm going to go into the same file. You can see I'm logged into another account here as a viewer. And so when I click on any of these, it's going to give me all the font properties, but I don't have to worry about like being asked to install a font or a font helper to sort of like see the appearance of those things. So just one of the things that we do, you don't have to make sure that everybody has the font. But I wanted to add one more thing to what Josh was saying about installing the fonts. So if you do have local fonts installed, you can obviously use the font helper to continue working in the browser or the desktop app. But if you are on a Figma organization plan, which is our enterprise tier, you can upload shared fonts to your team. So in our case, like we've uploaded our font right into this panel. which means like every team within our entire organization has access to this font. So all you have to do is click upload fonts, and you'll be able to browse, choose the fonts, upload your OTFs, and then they all become available for everyone to use. In that case, to answer one of Bobby's questions about working on a Chromebook or on a Linux environment, if you do have an enterprise plan, then you can upload your font, and no one who's using Figma needs to install anything. It'll actually always default to whatever font that you've uploaded to your team. So it'll sort of like supersede any locally installed version so that you can make sure everyone's using the same version.
And real quick on that too, this should go without saying, but or needing to be said, but we don't handle any of the licensing, so you do need to make sure with the font foundry that you're getting these typefaces from that you have the proper license to do this. So type designers spend a lot of time on these things, so yeah, just make sure you have the proper license.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things that I think was sort of like some of the thinking behind enabling that for the enterprise tier. A lot of the customers that are using that will often have their own corporate typeface that they have exclusive licenses for, and this just makes it easy to sort of like synchronize everybody on the same version of it.
Cool.
So moving on, line height, and this is a big one. I'm not going to go into like an insanely in-depth explanation about all of the line height changes that we've made because Marcin just published this epic blog post on the Figma blog. So figma.com/blog, you'll find the post that goes into a really amazing amount of detail that sort of like starts at the beginning with type history and how line height is calculated, how it was implemented in CSS. And so all of this sort of research that we did based on a lot of feedback that we got from users was to make some modifications so that it's a little bit easier to use. So I wanted to sort of highlight what that experience is if you're already using Figma and have existing text boxes. So this text box that I've made here, I've specified the line height to be 48 pixels. The font size is 36. It's just inter bold. And this is a single line of text. So by default, when we create this text box, it's going to be about this high, 48 pixels, since that's the line height. If we make like a multi-line text area, you can see that I've just made this larger. One of the big things that you'll notice is that if I switch between a line top and a line middle, you see this little shift. And of course, if we do that on the larger multi-line text box, we get the same sort of thing, except now it's centering it vertically within the text box. The change that we've made now you'll see like if I go into a legacy text box, there's this little button here that says that it's using the older text rendering method. You can access that from this little ellipse menu. And then you can click update to start using the latest changes that we've made. So just to sort of like show you what that looks like, I'm going to copy these and I'm going to update both of these. Now you'll see a little shift. So now what we're doing is we're like factoring in basically the full line height into the text box. So basically, when I switch these between a line vertical, or sorry, a line top and a line middle, there actually is no shift. So you don't have to change the alignment type based on whether or not you have a single line of text or multi-line of text. And this will be a lot more consistent with implementation, especially when you have other elements that you're measuring sizes from. So this box is 16 pixels away. If we were to make this a multi-line text, I should highlight that this is the new way of doing it. If I was to set this text box to grow in terms of height, that's going to be perfectly mapped to the exact line height dependent on the number of lines of text. And then when we measure these things, you're going to get a lot more consistent metrics than you would if you were to do this. So this looks like 16 pixels, but if you were to actually implement this with a 48 pixel line height, you actually wouldn't get the exact same pixel values between the actual type itself and the element, because it would be measuring from the top of the line height. So in this particular case, because there is that little shift downwards, which you can see from this red line that I've drawn, you'll get a much more consistent result, especially when your developers come in, they're viewing it in code mode. they're saying, okay, this is 36 over 48 pixels and it's 16 pixels from this object. So hopefully that helps. There's a lot more crazy subtleties to all of this that hopefully will make working with line height a lot easier. We still do support percentage-based line heights, but my recommendation in a lot of cases is to especially if you're creating a design system, is to like really specify like the pairings, like 36 pixels over 48 pixels. That usually helps.
Awesome.
Moving on to advanced type. Josh, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. So our advanced type options, to kind of see where those are at, there's this kind of more icon here in the bottom of the text properties panel. And when you click on that, you'll see this little advanced type panel come up. And so kind of the first thing we have, and Tom kind of talked about this a little bit, is the kind of frame. Oh no, he didn't talk about this, sorry. But the resizing of this frame. So if I take this text object here, oops, wrong button. So right now, if I look in the advanced type, right now it's grow horizontally. So as I type more text in here, the text frame, this blue line here, is going to grow horizontally. So it will not return to a new line unless I tell it to, by either using a soft return or a hard return. The other options you have are so grow vertically. So now as I start typing, see, it's going to just keep going down because I've said at this width is 104. Start growing the text box vertically instead of horizontally. Obviously I can still use returns here. And that will work. So, and then the last option is going to be a fixed size. So this is nice if you are kind of laying out, you'll see on web pages where you might have like an icon, and then you have a title, and then you have a body of text here. So if you kind of have like a fixed grid that you're working with, it can be nice to kind of say like, okay, I need these text box to have a width of, we'll say 400. So when I type that in 400, you'll see now, or I can go to fixed sized, and now this will always be 400. So whether I return or not, it's going to grow until it reaches 400 and then stop. And you see it also doesn't, it fixes the height as well. So you'll see the height is stuck at 228. So if you're passing this off to maybe a copywriter or someone that needs to kind of edit this text, if you provide those, they'll be able to see like, okay, we have roughly 3 to 4 lines of text to work with. So that's the different resizing options. Alignment is just repeated here if you need to change that. So now going into some of these transforms. So the first one is uppercase, does exactly what it sounds like it does. It changes all the lowercase characters to uppercase. We have lowercase, which will do the opposite. And then we have capitalize. So if I select this, it will just capitalize the first letter. Then we have some decoration options. So we support underline and we support strike through. I know a feature request for a while has been, supporting bullets and some other options like that. And that's definitely something we are kind of looking to include in the future. So obviously can't speak to timeline, but we definitely want to create a great type experience within Figma, because I know a lot of you work with a lot of type, laying out a bunch of text. So underline and strike through. You can also use some shortcuts. So you have Command B to create it bold. You have Command U to underline it. Is there one for strike through? I always forget it. No, there's not one for strike through. And then you have Command I to italicize. The other thing we do support, we support some of these OpenType features. Again, this is something we want to kind of improve on in the future. So we do support, if the font allows it, subscript and superscript. So if I select these here, subscript, so Inter does support it. Inter is a open source typeface that actually our designer Rasmus built and designed. So I think it's, do you know the website, Tom? Inter. I always forget it.
I'll bring it up on my screen in a second.
Okay, cool. So we'll link to that, but it's a free typeface that you can download. It's completely open source. There's a GitHub project that you can actually contribute to it. So if you are a type designer, you can do that. So it's now also our base font throughout the entire UI. So subscript and superscript. So just Inter supports it. A lot of fonts don't support it. This is something we're also trying to work on. We also have different tabular figures here. So if you have numbers, there's proportional lining and then tabular lining. So to kind of just see the difference between those two. So this will be the default, which is proportional. And then if I change this to tabular lining, you'll see that the spacing, so the kerning in between each of these letters is a little bit different. Sorry, numbers. So the tabular is great if you're actually laying out a table. You have that, and you have different numbers. So it's just going to make it easier to kind of read as you look down a bunch of numbers. So we have that. We also support, some ligatures, fractions, and then small caps if the font supports it, which I believe Inter does. No, it doesn't. I think Roboto might. Yeah, so Roboto supports small caps. But those are our advanced type features. One thing I forgot, when you're working on the resizing right in here, let's say you drag this out and you want it to go back to be exactly around the amount of text that you have, you can just double click on this frame here and it will jump back to grow horizontally and fit to the amount of text you have. So that's about it there. Are there any questions? Looks like you're answering them, Tom.
Getting through some of the questions. You can flip to my screen. I have the Inter website up as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so the URL is just rsms.me/inter. And Rasmus is always making improvements to this. It's a pretty awesome type family. So check that out. If you're looking for a nice sort of monolinear sans serif that you can use as part of an open source project. It's awesome.
Actually, before we jump into textiles, Tom, I know, both of us are kind of type nerds, or, we enjoy typography. And what are kind of your top resources that you would recommend for learning about, whether that's spacing or, laying out type or anything like that? Do you have any books or websites you recommend?
Yeah.
Putting you on the spot here.
Putting me on the spot. Websites, I'd probably have to go through my favorites because I wouldn't know the URLs offhand. But some of the quintessential typography books are Elements of Typographic Style from Robert Bringhurst. And even though it deals with a lot of print typography, a lot of the same principles apply. And so that's always a great primer. And then there's a lot of things from that I find are starting to be more heavily supported in CSS, like hanging punctuation and things, which are things that I'd also love to see in Figma in the future. And then one of the books that we mentioned, I think in the layout grids one, is Joseph Mueller Bachman's Grid Systems and Graphic Designs, and that handles less about the actual typeface portion of typography, but a little bit more about the alignments and structuring and especially creating a baseline grid. Those are all really valuable resources. And I'm sure there's other ones that I've got plethora of type books, and they're all escaping me right now. But I'm sure we could post some links in the description afterwards for anyone
Yeah.
interested in more resources.
Yeah, I know
The other
another
thing,
good one is Ellen Lupton's or Lupton, the Thinking with Type. That's kind of a classic one as well.
oh, for sure. There's also a few good resources on designsystems.com, which was a new project that we launched. Especially if you go into the typography area, there's a few articles and linked design systems that show you how they've like built their type scales and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot there.
Oh, no worries. One of the
Cool.
things I also wanted to circle back before we jumped into type styles with the width and height properties of the text boxes. One of the things that I do, this probably seems like a really simple trick, is let's just say you're building like a component, like a button. So let's just say this is like my button. We're going to turn this into a component. So right now I've got like 38 pixels on this side. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So now it's, like the padding on my button is 36 pixels on either side. And what's nice is that when you have the, right by default, the text is set to grow horizontally. But if you set it to like a fixed size, and then you set the constraints to be left and right within that component, um, you know, one of the things that I like about this is that when you type a longer text string, it'll drop into multiple lines, so that when you expand the button, basically the point at which that button like snaps back up to like one line, you know that you have like that perfect 38 pixel padding. So it's just a little visual trick that just makes it easier to like size things appropriately. Obviously, I think there's a lot of work and things that we can do to make that better or happen automatically. But until that happens, I think that's a good workaround that just gives you a little bit of a visual cue and how you can use those two things in tandem.
I did not even know that existed right there. That's awesome.
Cool. So on to textile. So basically, the process for creating a textile is you would just type into a text box and then configure your type. And then if you click on this styles palette button, you can access all the type styles that exist. So these may come from the file that you're in or a shared library that you have enabled. So all of these are coming from our UI design system. But I'm going to create a new one that's local to this file. So I just click the plus button and then I give it a name. And then once the text style is created, rather than like showing all the properties that you can change, we just show the style name, which you can always detach. And it's kind of the same thing you would with a component. And then you could go back and edit it again. So I'm just going to undo that. And one of the nice things about type styles in Figma is that in other software, often the alignment or things like color or even the alignment within the text box become part of the text style. So what ends up happening is like as you're creating a design system, you end up needing to create a whole bunch of different type styles that are sort of like not connected with one another. And then it just becomes like a headache to maintain. So right now, for example, if I was to make a bunch of these different text boxes, they're all using type styles. I can override the color. I could apply one of our color styles to it really easily. Within each of these, I can also override the alignment. So these are all still the same type style, but I don't have to like create a new one for left, right, and center, let's say. So that's really nice. Another thing that you can do too is let's make a duplicate of this and we'll make this, quite different. So I'm going to make another new type style. And then when we have a text box where you may want to have like multiple styles, you do have the ability to put like two styles in the same text box. And of course, like any part of this, even within like an existing text style, like if I highlight that E using like Command B and Command I can still override the bold and the italic, but it does that without breaking the type style. So that's one thing that you can do. And then one thing to keep in mind when you do use the type styles and you go into like handoff mode, in the code view, we'll serve up all the font properties. But if you switch to the tabular view, we tell you what the style name. So if you're, and this applies to like any type of style, like color or effect styles as well. We'll always serve up the style name as well. So if you're trying to like synchronize with your your design system or something that you've already established in engineering, like different color names, you can name your styles the same way in Figma, and then developers can see that when they go to inspect the file.
Real quick too, Tom. The nice thing too is with the multiple styles is that you can actually have both styles and non-styles in the same text box too. So if, for example, you wanted to break just the O or something or a single letter, you can also just break that style and then apply, different look to it.
For sure. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I should just show one more thing too, is that uh, anything that you create as part of like a text style, when you do go into your shared library and you publish, those text styles will become available in other files. And then when you come back into this canvas view, when you have nothing selected, you'll see a list of all of the local styles that exist within your document. And if you click on them, here's where you can adjust them. So if I had a whole bunch of these instances of this text across my document, and I was to click on edit and then change these properties, they will change everywhere. And you can see that little letter that we detached, like highlighting what Josh was just talking about. That one gets detached, so it doesn't get affected by the style. And then one more thing that I wanted to show, especially if you're importing sketch files and your type styles aren't maintained, just because of the way we handle type styles, those aren't part of the import. But one of the things that you can do is let's detach all of these. So these are just all sorts of different text boxes. They all have the same properties. But imagine you had a file where you've got the same text style that's applied in your sketch file across a whole bunch of different screens. If you select one of these text boxes and then go up to the edit menu, or you can do it through the hamburger menu and just type in select all, and you can say with same text properties, and it'll select all of those across the entire page. And then that way you can like batch apply a text style to all of those really easily. So those functions come in handy all the time. So if you're looking for them, they'll be contextual to whatever type of thing that you have selected. But if you were to, like, for example, have this gray box and you're using this, C4, C4, C4 color, you could select it, select all with same fill, and it'll select all of those things. And then you could like map it to a color style. So that's just another little trick that comes in handy when you need to select multiple text boxes. And if you do have legacy Figma files from before the line height update, and you want to update all of those text boxes to use the new line height, you can use the same functionality to like select all those text boxes, for example, like here, and then you would go into the more property, and then down here, like I showed before, you'd see the update button, and then you can update them all to the new line height.
Awesome.
Anything else to add, Josh?
No. So we do have a few questions. So apologies on getting this name right. So No Jimdean asks how to flip an object. So I'm going to switch to my screen real quick. We'll just use one of these. So you have the rotation field up here that you can change. But there are shortcuts. So to flip kind of horizontally, you can do Shift H, and that will shift it or flip it horizontally. And then you also have Shift V for vertical. So as you can see, it actually works with type. It's still live. I can type and it goes the opposite way, which is gibberish at the moment. But flip that back. There we go. So that's that. Let's see here. There was another question up here. So how do you handle something like long text with several titles in Figma compared to development? Often a title will have higher padding above to indicate it's a new section. Do you split it up for every section in Figma, or do you add extra line height to the titles in Figma? I feel like you can do this multiple different ways. I and maybe I'm not doing it the right way, but I tend to create separate objects. So especially if I'm using the text styles within Figma, I'll have something like heading, H1, H2, H3, a paragraph block, and then just create different ones. So, if I'm using, um, this new text style, and then if I create a paragraph, let's break this, and then this is the paragraph style. So I'll just then line those up. I know obviously within HTML, CSS, you might just use like a single div and then use the BR tag to kind of break the line of text, and maybe even use spans to style those. But this is typically how I use it. I don't know about you, Tom, if you do it a different way, but
Yeah, I mean, there's been some situations where sometimes I'll put multiple styles in the same text box, and then I'll use the paragraph spacing to change the difference between them. And that can work sometimes when you want to create a component that is a little easier to update so that things like shift around in the right way. But in general, like I kind of go with what you're suggesting, and I would sort of build things as two separate text boxes, just because when you do go to handoff and you're giving to developers, it just makes it a lot easier for them to explicitly measure the distances between um, those two text objects. And especially with the new line height updates, it'll be a lot more accurate, especially if you're developing for the web. So that would be my suggestion as well. Now, obviously, as you sort of like encounter situations where you have like a headline or something that's going to break into two lines, there is a little bit of pixel pushing that you're going to have to do, but hopefully that's a problem that we can sort of alleviate in the future through a number of different ways that hopefully will become a part of the product one day.
Yeah. So you just mentioned something, Tom, that reminded me. So you can actually combine text styles with components if that wasn't obvious. So here I have the H1 and P for paragraph. I have two separate text box. If I let's create a frame, and let's say this is, a little card, rename that. And then we're going to stretch this out here. If I actually, let's line this up a little bit better, create this into a component, and then do that. Obviously, this is going to keep the styles within the instances of the component. So then if I were to, within assets, share this, publish it, it'll also keep those styles published. So that way you can, let your teammates know that, hey, here's this card component. It must use, the H1 as the title and the paragraph style for this text box. And then if you ever go back and, here's the paragraph. If I go and edit this, let's bump up the size. You can see it's adjusting across both the main kind of master component and the instance of that. Maybe I want it to actually be medium. So just something to keep in mind there as well. Let's see here. Other questions?
I saw there was another question from VR Patel about, being able to control the type units like rems. We don't currently support that. And I think as Michael Richens suggested, it gets a little tricky, because then it also means that you have to be able to define a base font size for the entire Figma file. I think that's like the only way you could do it, and it makes sense. But that's sort of one of those reasons why, like, if you are using like style names that exist within your design system as well, and you're starting to like establish these types of things when you're going to production, then that's where it's like, even if you have to specify pixel values in Figma, if developers are referencing like the names of styles and the names of colors, then the actual values of those styles and colors become sort of like less relevant, because they can consume sort of like a variable when they're coding, and not necessarily have to get the actual pixel value, which in your actual design system may be specified as rems instead of pixels. I hope that kind of makes sense. But it may be something that we can investigate in the future. It's not on the roadmap in the short term, but I'll definitely look into that for you.
Cool. And then Steve asks, is there any way to insert an icon into a text field? Trying to get an icon next to variable text that all centers within a button, and it seems like there's currently not a way to do it. So yeah, unfortunately, unless you're using like an icon font, there's not really a way to do this. So this kind of jumps into supporting, kind of like a auto layout feature or resizing, which is something we're definitely working on. But it starts to get pretty complicated really quick. So, Tom, I am on your screen if you do have a tip for that or anything else to
Yeah,
add.
I was gonna just say that you're exactly right. Hopefully, it's something that we can support better in the future if you have like an icon as a component. But yeah, if you are using an icon font, then you could achieve it. Um, and if you've never used some of the icon fonts like the Material Icons font from Google Fonts, they have like these ligatures that are pre-programmed into it. So like, for example, if you know the icon that you're looking for, they all have like an actual name. So for example, like if you type in mic, it automatically replaces it with the microphone icon. And then of course, in that case, you could say, of course, I'm still typing in the icon font, which I'm about to change. So you could do something like that. You may have to get a little bit fancy with line heights and things like that to get everything to align properly. That all depends on how the icon font's built. But in that case, if you did have a component and this was aligned to the center of it, then let's just turn this into a component. Yeah, then like, yes, those will stay centered as you change the label, but really an icon font is the only way to do it. There are some tools where you can sort of like export SVGs from Figma and import them into a couple of websites to turn SVGs into an icon font. So you can turn your own icons into a font that you can use. So that may be one option. But yeah, hopefully that's something we can support in the future to be a little bit more intuitive and make use of components in your system.
Yeah, and Matan or Matt, and sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. So we need the box model. I think the box model makes sense for a lot of use cases, especially if you're building something for the web. But that doesn't necessarily translate it if you're building something in iOS. They have a completely different auto layout model, and so I think similar to this line height, where going through the article, we had to make some decisions because we're rendering the text by ourselves, and if you have different viewers and editors on different systems and different rendering engines, then it starts to get pretty complicated. And that same kind of thing applies here, where if you're building something for iOS or Android and the web, it starts to just get complicated. So we are working on it. It's definitely something that needs to be solved, and it will probably just look a little bit different than the box model. And then Michael asked for single border support. I would love that. I think that's another kind of small win that we can work on here in the future.
Yeah, and I would just wanted to add on to what you were saying, Josh, about the different platforms, and I think that's also like one of the things that's like challenging, but also pretty amazing about Figma is that at the point in time where you're iterating on a design and you're not even sure how you're going to solve the problem or how it's going to look, and you're collaborating. Worrying about browser compatibility is not something that is necessarily like top of mind until you get a little closer to implementation. Obviously, that's something that you want to be able to address with like a design system in Figma, which I hope we can support a little bit more accurately in terms of what you're talking about with a box model and auto layout. But from a collaboration perspective, having our own renderer in Figma also allows us to sort of like make sure that everyone that's using Figma, regardless of whether you're an editor, a copywriter, or a developer or a stakeholder that's like coming in to provide feedback for a project, that everyone's seeing the exact same thing. And we obviously can't control what browser everyone's going to be accessing it in. So that's one of the things that is sort of like nice about the way we're currently handling it, is that there's a great level of consistency between like what everyone's going to experience. So you don't have to wonder like, is somebody seeing something completely different?
Yep. So there's a follow-up. It's more like using position absolute. It's a little different than that because, using position absolute on the web, it makes sense. You're describing exactly where you want that element to be, and um, but you don't necessarily have those same kind of correlations within Figma, with the canvas. And, is that position related to a parent frame? Is it related to the text object itself? Things start to get complicated, but it is something we're working on. Now we're getting into some other questions. Coming to component ecosys for better design systems. Is it possible to make a couple of SVG icon to text font in Figma? Did you mention something about SVGs, Tom?
Yeah, there's no possible way to make the icon font directly from Figma, but you could export SVGs from Figma, and there are a couple of tools online, I believe. I can try to pull up the links and put them in the description of where you can upload SVGs and actually create an icon font that you can use from it. I can't vouch to the accuracy of all of them because it's not something that I typically use, but that might be an option. In response to BR Patel's question about updates to components, there are definitely lots of component things that we're working on. I don't want to get into like the specifics of them because I'm not sure sort of like the order of operations in terms of like how some of these updates will be released, but it's definitely something that like we're not losing sight of. There's a couple of like fixes and improvements that are in the works right now that I think will make them better for design systems for sure.
Cool. Yeah, so just to wrap up, this one was a little shorter today, but we're going to continue doing these live streams. I know we've said this in the past. We're kind of reaching the end of the kind of different demos within Figma as far as the feature set goes. So we're going to be mixing it up a little bit, inviting some guests on, getting some looks into how other designers and other teams are actually using Figma, how they're, building out their design systems, tips and tricks from them. And so be on the lookout for that. If there is something specific you'd like to see or someone specific you'd like to see on these live streams, definitely message either Tom or I on Twitter. I think both of our handles are in the description, or if not, we'll make sure it's in there. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. And please, 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 as Josh said, let us know what you'd like us to cover in future streams. It'd be super helpful so we can make sure that we produce some interesting content for you all. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.